think of it when you start a business, and let's say you have like 3 people in the business at this moment, it's still early stage, you have certain ways in which you operate. I mean, certain ways in which maybe you deal with the people that you just hired, the other 2, or how you actually kind of communicate with them where you're going, creating a kind of a vision about it, or how you actually relate to these people. Maybe you have a meeting every day, figure out what the next tasks are and so forth. So you have all these kind of concepts first, like the concept of vision, or the concept of a meeting, the concept of a, let's say, organizational structure, et cetera, and you may be using tools for that to actually implement those things. So for example, you may have a kind of a document that describes your product or describes your vision for your product or your service and so forth. And then you may have also the disciplines that everybody follows, or processes, or essentially ways of actually doing the business. All of that stuff, all of those concepts, tools, and disciplines, sometimes I refer to them as CTDs, just for the sake of having yet another acronym. They govern all the aspects of how a business actually functions, comprise the business operating system.
Welcome to the Value Factory Podcast, brought to you by One Accord. We're all about helping businesses thrive and grow through leadership, strategy, and meaningful impact. Now, whether you're a seasoned executive or just starting out, our goal is to provide insights and inspiration to help you navigate your journey. Thanks for tuning in.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Value Factory presented by One Accord. I'm your host, Andrew Ballard, and we've got a very exciting show today. We're going to be talking about business growth in the AI economy, and we have business operating system and AI specialist with us, Sergio. How do you pronounce your last name?
Simmel.
Simmel. Okay. Editor, cut that out. I'm very excited to welcome to our podcast Sergio Simmel. He is a business growth guide committed to guiding founders, owners, and CEOs, as well as their leadership teams, on growing their business faster, easy, and joyfully into the AI economy. And that's what we're really going to be talking about. We'll also be talking about the connection between a business operating system and AI as we get into this. He does that, works with small to mid-sized businesses, SMBs, by upgrading their business operating system. So it's a complete and coherent suite of concepts, tools, and disciplines that govern how the business functions. So welcome, Sergio. Thank you for joining us today. Do you have anything else
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we jump into your interview?
Thank you. Well, I just want to maybe add that I shifted my practice about 12 and a half years ago to what I'm doing right now. And at that time, I started by being actually the first EOS implementer in New England. If your audience is familiar with the entrepreneurial operating system created by Gino Wickman, and originally described in his book Traction. And since then, I've been working with over 75 or so leadership teams of small, medium-sized businesses worldwide. I've had clients here in England and everywhere in the United States and Canada, and also even internationally across the pond, since I'm on the eastern part of the United States. And prior to that, I founded 3 companies, 2 in the high-tech industry and 1 in the e-learning space, and served as an executive, specifically as a fractional chief product officer for about 7, what now we would refer to as SaaS companies. And of course, at that time, the term didn't exist, so I'm kind of retroactively applying it in the past.
And you mentioned New England a couple of times. You're coming to us from Boston. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So I actually live in the city of Boston, and it's a beautiful, beautiful, what sometimes we refer to as an Indian summer day. Today, it's actually unusually warm. I think the temperature is about 81 or 82 degrees outside.
Well, in Seattle, it's about 70 degrees, but it's blue sky and beautiful. Seattle, we kind of go up and down. You just never know what the heck you're going to get. So, Sergio, what exactly is a business operating system, and what does that have to do with AI? Could you kind of define that and share the connection between a business operating system, which our audience will hear us refer to as BOSS also. Anyway, would love to know about that and share with our founders, owners, CEOs, entrepreneurs that are watching today.
So let me start by saying that every single business that's actually operating, it doesn't matter whether it started operating yesterday, it has one person or 10,000 people or more, has actually a business operating system or a boss.
Whether they know it or not.
Whether they know it or not, exactly. And essentially, think of it when you start a business, and let's say you have like three people in the business at this moment, it's still early stage, you have certain ways in which you operate. I mean, certain ways in which maybe you deal with the people that you just hired, the other two, or how you actually kind of communicate with them where you're going, creating a kind of a vision about it, or how you actually relate to these people. Maybe you have a meeting every day, figure out what the next tasks are and so forth. So you have all these kind of concepts first, like the concept of vision, or the concept of a meeting, the concept of a, let's say, organizational structure, et cetera, and you may be using tools for that to actually implement those things. So for example, you may have a kind of a document that describes your product or describes your vision for your product or your service and so forth. And then you may have also the disciplines that everybody follows, or processes, or essentially ways of actually doing the business. All of that stuff, all of those concepts, tools, and disciplines, sometimes I refer to them as CTDs, just for the sake of having yet another acronym. They govern all the aspects of how a business actually functions, comprise the business operating system. Now, as you mentioned, very aptly so, most businesses don't internalize it. They don't, think in those terms. And essentially, they have a business operating system that got concocted kind of almost accidentally by the founders and maybe the leaders a little bit later that come in and work into a business by their own histories. They bring, various concepts and tools and so forth from their previous experience, because they tend to be initially experienced people. And then there is at some point in time, some of those leaders realize that, the business is actually moving along and, things are not kind of working too well. So they need to actually do something about how the business actually operates or functions. And some of these people may have actually come across this notion of a business operating system through their readings or through their colleagues. They may be belonging to a peer-to-peer group like, I don't know, Vistage or EO or something like this, or C12 or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they say, I think I'm going to need to upgrade this to something that is actually designed, that actually is coherent, where all these pieces are designed to function well. And those kinds of operating systems or business operating system is what I refer to them as branded business operating. EOS, where I started my practice with, is one of them. It's an example. It's probably the most known example. EOS Worldwide has done a tremendously good job of.
That's the entrepreneur operating system, right?
Right, absolutely. I mean, essentially, if you are a CEO of a small to medium-sized business today, and you haven't heard of EOS, the next question I would ask you is, what rock have you been living under? Because everybody knows about it. But there are many others. In fact, there are about 51, 52 branded operating systems. Scaling Up is another example. Pinnacle is an example. Of course, One Accord has created its own brand around a business operating system that's supported by a SaaS platform called 90, and it refers to it as Oasis, as you very well know. So these are the branded operating systems. Now, to get to the second part of your question, which is, how does that relate to AI? Let me say something about AI first, and then we'll make the connection. So, AI is a technology that we all, of course, everybody talks about. It's, kind of you can't turn on the TV or read a business journal or listen to a business podcast without hearing it mentioned.
Even on the
And
news.
or even on the news, absolutely. So the way I think of AI at this stage is that even though it looks like a new technology, and some people may say to themselves, we've gone through this kind of hype, we had all kinds of things in the past that, came and went and so forth. Well, this time around, it's actually something a little bit different because not only do we have a different technology, but we are actually, this particular technology, not only that it's moving very fast and it's kind of unknown where it's going, but most importantly, it's actually starting to affect very profoundly the way we do work, the way we do, let's say, knowledge-based work, not yet physical work. That is coming, was going to come later once we embed this stuff into things like robots and other kinds of physical objects. We are a little bit a ways from that, but right now it's affecting the way it does work. It's affecting the way I do my own work. I'm sure if you're a user of that, it's probably affecting the way your team or you're doing work. So
Absolutely. We use a few different tools.
absolutely, absolutely. But it's also affecting the way you think about work. Because remember, we've been trained, we knowledge workers, for decades, and historically for a couple of centuries, to think about work in the following simplified way. Our knowledge-based work: you get some input from something. These days is probably either from a human speech or from a screen. You read something and then you think. So that actually is a problem that you need to solve. So you think about it. You use your brain, and then you output some response to that, some solution to that problem, either by voice or typing it as text, etc., etc. So that's basically fundamentally how we do all this work. I mean, if you simplify it to the max, that's the way to look at it. Well, with AI, things actually are changing and shifting as a model a little bit differently. Because instead of actually asking yourself when you get this input, how am I going to solve this problem? Think about like a business leader, for example, like a CEO, a problem shows up. Instead of doing that, the question that we need to ask ourselves is, how am I going to use AI to help me solve this problem? And that actually has a profound impact on how we do work. So let's set that aside because, of course, we can talk about that for days. So let's combine that with what I said before that a business operating system is. Because remember, it's just a way that everything functions, that work gets done. So it should start we start to understand that, in fact, the presence of AI, and especially the ubiquitous presence of AI, sort of like having, electricity that's always there and available to us, will impact how this, tools for running the business, how these disciplines are actually, in fact, working inside a business. So instead of, let me give you a concrete example as a connection. So one thing that I teach, and everybody who is a BOS coach, as we sometimes refer to them, like a Pinnacle Guide or a Scaling Up Coach or EOS Implementer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We teach, for example, and we coach leaders on how to carry on, for example, a weekly team meeting with a kind of structure, et cetera, et cetera. Well, so imagine that you have a leadership team of 6 people, 6 leaders, right? The CEO, and maybe there's a COO, maybe not, and there are functional heads in the room. Well, now you have these 6 people plus AI. So when it comes around to actually solve a problem as a team, you have this entity that actually most likely knows more about that problem than anybody in the room, because it has access to the wisdom of the world, as we know. So can put together a very, very compelling, response to it. Now, there may be aspects of the reality that AI doesn't know about, and that's what the humans come into play. And they're ultimately the arbiters of what they consider to be a good solution or a bad solution. But the speed at which we can actually get to the solution gets a totally, we are talking about a totally different world. So the way to even do meetings is starting to change and will absolutely, if I, of course, my crystal ball is as shiny as yours. But if I were to, predict something, I can say that probably, in 2-3 years, if not earlier, it's not uniform. For some companies, it's going to come earlier, for others, a little bit later. The way we will actually, as a group, as a team, deal with issues, with problems, have meetings, and so forth, will radically change. That's the connection.
Excellent. And it's such a huge time saver. I know that's what we experience. And, one thing I didn't mention, I was a bit remiss in your introduction, is that you have recently become a principal at One Accord as part of your BOS, as part of your business operating system. And I was reading about you and yesterday's newsletter, and welcome to the team. We feel fortunate and blessed to have you part of our group. So
I'm very excited about that as well.
Yeah, well, I look forward to collaborating with you. And I know one thing that you're really expert at, Sergio, and that is helping businesses, SMBs, small to mid-sized businesses, upgrade their business operating system. And, as you were speaking, I was thinking of my experience and observation of most companies is as they grow, you really are able to expose weaknesses. And this is where the business operating system can come in to standardize and sustain, a better operating process. So in terms of upgrade, why should any leader of an SMB upgrade their business operating system?
Well, so first of all, I kind of touched this a little bit earlier, which is to say that, if any of you listeners to this conversation have, led a business or in the past or are currently actually the leader of a business, that in the kind of evolution of that business from the start to, and especially if you're a founder, to the moment you exit the business, and there are many kinds of exits, not necessarily through a sale. You can exit in all kinds of ways, but through that period, which may take a few years or it may take decades, we know that we all experience many times where things are kind of, appear to be derailing in some fashion. Whatever worked so far doesn't work. In the words of my good friend and one of my, mentors, Marshall Goldsmith, what got us here won't get us there.
Right.
So if you take this statement by itself, it's the title of one of his books, right? But if you just take this statement by itself, this is actually kind of the underlying fundamental reason, because the needs of the business change constantly, as the business evolves, as the business goes through its ups and downs. So the tools and the concept, the tools and the disciplines that we actually, either by being aware of them or deliberately or accidentally, have actually adopted in the functioning of the business in the past, are likely to not be the right ones at the next stage.
Right.
In fact, there is this whole model that I actually teach and get my clients to embrace, where the evolution of any of the business from start to exit, let's say, is actually going through a number of essentially 5 stages of this journey, and they are inevitable. Every single business goes through those stages, and as it moves from stage to stage to stage, and even during that movement is not instantaneous. It takes sometimes a business is in one stage for years, but even inside the stage, those needs actually change. So if you get fixed in the way you operate and you don't adapt to the current needs, because you are keeping things the same way for long periods of time, you will end up essentially with, let's call it, a friction between the reality of the business, what the business or the organization or the people need today, and the concepts tools and disciplines that it functions by. And that friction will slow you down, makes things harder, makes things slower. In fact, it robs you from the potentials of the business, from the potential results of the business. So to answer your question straight on, if you want to actually unleash this business in its full potential at the stage that it is, you got to bring the operating system to be in sync at every moment with the realities of the business.
Based
And
on
that's
where
why
you are, what stage. When you say 5 stages, Sergio, are you referring to the business life cycle?
well, it's so here are the 5 stages. There's a start stage, when you start. There's a build stage where you are actually, building your services and your market and so forth. And there's a growth stage, then there is a scale stage, and then finally there's let's call it an exit stage, right? So, and each one of them has certain characteristics. That's what I mean. I don't know whether that's a life cycle. I call it a journey. And these stages, every single business goes through these stages, and viewed from the perspective, for example, of the founder or founders, it has a lot to do with the involvement of the founder or founders in the business, but it also has a lot to do with what does the organizational structure looks like, how deep, how broad, and so forth, what kind of functions, what kind of competencies need to be built inside the business so the business functions well. And all of that stuff belongs to the business operating system.
Excellent. And a moment ago, you were talking about different BOSs, different business operating systems. You mentioned EOS, which I know you're certified in. You mentioned scaling up, Pinnacle. In fact, you said there were dozens and dozens. I don't know if you can answer this question, but which do you, of course, the Oasis, the proprietary system for One Accord, which one do you believe is the best? Or is it situational?
So I have, of course, if I brought in a room 10 coaches, let's call it, or people who do the same kind of work that I do, and there are, hundreds of them worldwide, and ask them the same question, of course, I can promise you that we will have a whole, a really tense conversation, because everybody has a different opinion about this. So everybody's going to have another view. I have actually a very contrarian view of this particular topic.
Love it.
So, which is the following. First of all, most of these business operating systems are not actually, even though there are so many of them, they are not actually very different from each other. They actually overlap, even though they may use different terminologies, et cetera. The really fundamentals are basically the same by and large. They can vary. Some of them are broader in spectrum, some of them are narrower, et cetera, et cetera. So first of all, there is a lot of commonality among all those things. So number one, business leaders who have not spent, a decade or more, a dozen years like I have and other colleagues of mine have had, actually studying and practicing this field, may not be even realized because they are just looking through a particular window. So that's point number one. Point number two is that even though many of those business operating systems, as they are designed, reflect, the experience of their creators and so forth, and they can be very useful, and they, in a sense, reflect what I would call kind of informally the fundamental laws of business. They are a reflection of those laws. At the same time, each business is to a large extent unique. Sometimes we can talk about it like a snowflake. All snowflakes are structurally similar, but each snowflake is actually unique.
There's no
And
duplication there.
not only that each business is unique, but as I said before, each business is in a constant shift and a constant change over its lifetime. So my sincere belief is that regardless of where you start, you actually need to create and have as a functioning way for this particular business, the business operating system that fits best, at this moment in time with its own goals and objectives.
So in other words, your business operating system scales or changes as your business changes.
Exactly. And so to get back to your original question, which one is the best? I would say that an experienced BOS coach can actually shape something based perhaps starting from a business operating system that they know best, but needs to shape something that fits your, meaning, the client's specific requirements at that time, and actually stick with this client over the whole rest of its journey and keep adapting it as the business evolves. So, by the way, you mentioned EOS, to be, very clear, I'm not, because EOS worldwide actually has a whole bunch of terminology that they're very fond of actually maintaining as their IP. I'm not currently a certified EOS employee. I did not buy an EOS franchise. So I started my practice that way, and I was a certified EOS implementer for about 6 or 7 years. But then I actually started adopting other, the design business operating system, a Pinnacle Guide, and then I became a certified, which I still am, scaling up coach. So essentially, in my own practice, that's what I do. I take pieces from all of these pieces. I use a platform which you and I are both familiar with, which is the 90 platform, and I shape something that fits in my own judgment, this particular business at this particular time with this particular people, etc., so that it actually ultimately functions the best way.
Excellent. Excellent. So, we've touched on this, but specifically, what does it take to do a BOS upgrade? When should the leadership team implement it? And what are the moving parts? How do you make it happen?
Well, how much time do we have? No, I'm kidding. So, well, it is both a science and so, first of all, when I encounter a new client and, we start talking and they say, they want to go through this process, one of the first things that I have to do is that I have to assess where they are, because ultimately I need to meet them where they are. There are various other kind of approaches, but I need to actually figure out what is it that's the most important part, the most important aspects, the most important, let's say, pains that they are suffering right now. Because, I'm dealing with human beings. Usually I work with the entire leadership team, sometimes just with the CEO, but in most cases, the entire leadership team. So this is a group of people with their own histories, with their own personalities, with their own ways of doing things and so forth. And so they have current set of challenges that they're struggling with. And of course, the business itself, the organization itself, has already some culture already in place. So in my view, the way to do it is to actually assess where they are and start actually focusing on areas that will actually make a difference to them. So the humans, the leaders to begin with, and the rest of the organization following, they actually can start seeing improvements right away in some areas of how they operate. Because let's actually kind of, if I were to kind of step back and ask myself, what is it really that I do, or my colleagues who do this kind of work do for their clients? Really, we are in the business of habit changes. We are all operating as humans, as leaders and so forth. We have habits in the way, and these habits manifest themselves as, practices and tools and so forth. But we have habits, and any upgrade requires change. And as much as I know, as much as everybody else, your listeners know, that habit change is one of the hardest, maybe the hardest thing that humans can be faced.
Absolutely.
At the individual level, never mind businesses. Take something that everybody knows about. I don't know, weight loss or, healthy lifestyle. Knowledge about it is simple. It makes no difference. In fact, I have always this funny story that I say, listen, if you think that if I go to the corner of my street and I ask 1,000 passers, passing by people, this simple question. I said, if you needed to do the following that I'm about to ask you, would you know how to lose weight. And I asked them, what do you think the answer would be, yes or no? I mean, the average answer. And how many yeses and how many nos? And most people say, no, you're going to get 1,000 yeses because everybody knows how to do it. And in fact, I joke, I said, it's basically, you can summarize in 4 words, less, move, more. That's all there is. That's all the knowledge that you have to do.
And while they know they have that knowledge, a larger percentage of the population doesn't act on that knowledge.
Exactly. So you nailed it. Exactly. Knowledge makes no difference. Acting, and why people get into action, they only get into action where they have either, a big pain, or somehow they found it within themselves to the willingness to change habits that are already put in place. It's the same thing with businesses. So to get back to the original question of how we do this, is that we start by actually changing some of the habits. Now, having said that, there are places that we start and competencies that we develop in these leaders that are known by experience and by theory and by not just my experience, but the common experience of people who have been doing this for some time, that are actually more effective than others, and they are more needed to be actually addressed right away. So of course we do this. For example, teaching and coaching teams, like a leadership team, on how to solve issues is one of them. Because in most cases, in most meetings, they actually don't do that effectively and kind of once and for all. Or how to create accountability in a culture. We know that everybody needs that. This is not that's a universal. So we start from some universals, but then there are some things that are specific to a particular client for a particular business that we address. So I don't know whether I answered your question entirely, or to your satisfaction, but essentially it's a process. And, my average client stays with me for 3.5, 4 years. And, sometimes it takes, a short period of time because, I catch the business or the people in it at the right time. And also they to be highly motivated. And sometimes it takes longer because, they have a longer history.
Yeah, maybe more bad habits. It's like you wanting to start to go to the gym. And I had this personal experience many years ago where it was so hard to get motivated to do it. But forcing myself to do it every week for a month, after the month or so, I actually started looking forward to it because I started to understand the benefits. And rather it being, I've got to go to the gym, it's like, I get to go to the gym. I'm going to keep this up. And it's what you were talking about. It takes a while to form a new habit. I've read in some psychology journals, it takes 21 days. For me, if I can do a month, I'm going to start really getting the roll there. So what I'd like to do, Sergio, is to kind of go back to where we started this whole conversation and really understand, what do your clients get from you at this intersection of business operating system upgrades and AI upskilling, and how those kind of connect together?
Absolutely. If you, so let me talk a little bit about the AI and then I'll reconnect it with BOSs. So if you talk to most business leaders or many business leaders about AI, and people who, maybe they feel that they need to do something about it, and they're actually looking to actually take action. Most people will probably look at functional areas within the business, let's say marketing or sales or operations or finance or your people, et cetera, where they can actually use AI to increase productivity, to increase the quality of the output and so forth. So they are looking for tools to implement. The classic examples are, let's implement a bot that can serve as our first line customer service entity, where customers can go and get their simple answers, and only the second line or third level will actually be serviced by actually humans. And that way, we can actually specialize these humans and train them on how to get higher level answers, as opposed to having them basically give the same answer over and over and over that a bot could actually create. And that's a totally legitimate, way to think about it. So in my mind, that's totally fine, but it's actually a more, if you wish, tactical approach to AI. If I were to look at a more strategic, long-term approach to AI, I would ask myself, if I were the CEO or the business owner, first of all, we know that AI, not only the promise, but even we know even the emerging reality of AI is able to actually create at least 20 or 30% increases in productivity, efficiency in knowledge workers. And also, in many areas, it's able to actually create a better quality output from these people who are actually using AI. So, and then I would ask myself, so what's the most valuable asset that I have in my business? And for most businesses, especially for most knowledge-based businesses, the most important assets are what? People, the people in there, right? So my approach, or what I'm actually providing my clients with, is an approach to actually upskill these people so people can actually become very comfortable and very skilled, hence the name upskilling, on using AI in their current job. Now, one man say, well, that's a pretty simple thing. You just go and train some people, you give them, some case studies, and they will actually know how to create a complex prompt. That is true for all technologies, and I would contend that it's not entirely true for AI. Because, let's go back to what I said earlier, in order to actually really use this technology effectively, we need to change the way we do work. And that is a habit change. So back to what we were saying, and that takes some time and also takes an effort that addresses their own ways or patterns of how they think about their own job. You see, when we have a job, and that job can be the job of a CEO or anybody in your organization, we usually don't think or don't spend too much time thinking about how we carry on our job. What we just do it because we know how to do it.
Right.
We don't think necessarily about, what's my workflow? What are the steps that I take to create something? Well, it turns out that in order to use AI effectively, I have to start thinking that way. And in fact, I can use AI to help me think that way. So what I'm trying to help people with is to start thinking about their own job, whatever they are, their own responsibilities, their own accountabilities, their own deliverables, as any job would have, and start thinking about the workflows that lead to those deliverables, lead to the fulfillment of these responsibilities, and then discover, with the help of AI, what portions of those workflows can be actually, at least partially, if not totally, delegated to AI, so that the net result is that I can do these things faster and better meaning with a higher quality, so I can create actually time, so I can do one of two things with this time. Either I can do more of the same, which may be useful to the business, or I can actually start evolving my own job. I can do things that, in the past I could never even imagine that I could actually do. But now I can, because I have both the time and I have this companion called AI that can help me do that. That's basically what I'm trying to help my clients with. So I have, for example, a course, a process that I take, a small cohort of people through, no matter what their experience with AI starting with, so that we are actually working through a process of actually taking their own job and starting decomposing and discovering their own workflows and starting, semi-automating some of their workflows and so forth, essentially transforming their jobs. Because I start from the belief that most of our jobs, including mine, by the way, will be utterly transformed as we get as AI becomes more and more ubiquitous. Think of it as electricity. You don't start thinking, well, what am I going to do with electricity today? You don't. If it's dark outside, you turn on your light, the lamp. Well, 150 years ago, if it was light, well, in the best possible circumstances, you have an oil lamp or a candle that you can actually use, and that barely gave you something to use. Now we don't even think about, except for when we have a power outage, about operating without electrical light. And it's always there. It's always present. That's basically where AI is going to go. So now connecting it to the operating system, basically it's one and the same. How do we use AI to actually execute everything that we need to do in a business for it to function faster, to produce better results, to grow faster, etc. So that's basically combine these two fields, and basically for many businesses that are willing to take this leap, that actually will put them, if you wish, ahead of the game, ahead of their competition, in my humble opinion, in this kind of fast-moving wave. I joke with people and I say to them, we all are going to be hit by this wave. So we have two options. You have two options, I have two options. We can be hit by the wave either from behind or from the front. So let's take each one of the options. If you want to be hit by the wave from behind, first of all, you have to be ahead of the wave. And that's basically what I'm trying to help you.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you are hit, you are projected forward, which is exactly where you want to go, except that you're going to get there faster. So that's one possibility. If you're hit by the wave from the front, meaning basically you're behind the wave and, it just comes at you, only one thing is going to happen. You're going to drown. And as a business, and of course, I don't want to be dramatic about it, but as a business, that is a reality that, in a competitive marketplace, your competitors that are going to do something with AI and are going to be able to produce stuff at a lower cost, the stuff that's better than you, and they're going to actually be able to evolve with their own market faster, by definition, they're going to win.
Your competitors are going to literally leave you behind.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Because you got punched in the face from the front. It's like the analogy of, either being proactive or reactive. If you're getting hit from behind, you're being proactive. You're thinking about how to employ this to increase your competitive advantage. Or
Absolutely.
Reactive, you're already behind the curve or behind the wave.
Exactly.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Well, Sergio, this has been a fascinating conversation. And Sergio is the founder of Get Business Momentum, and also recently coming on board as a principal for One Accord. So, Sergio, how can our listeners get a hold of you if they have some questions or would like to learn more about that integration between a business operating system and aided by AI?
Absolutely. So, first of all, of course, I have a LinkedIn page, the ubiquitous place where all people in business show up, and I see my name here spelled correctly, and thank you for that on this video. So basically, search me on. I happen to have a name that's fairly unique, so most likely you're going to find me as opposed to anybody else with the same name. I don't think there is anybody else with the same name. And then just reach out, and if you want to connect there, just make sure that you maybe make in LinkedIn you can actually specify a little note when you're trying to connect with somebody and say, I would like to. I heard your conversation on this podcast and with One Accord, and I'll know exactly to accept your invitation, and we can actually schedule a time to actually chat. I don't have a bot that I built to speak on my name. You will get the real human. Also, my email address is very simple. It's SSS at getbusinessmomentum.com. That's another way of reaching out to me. It's probably less effective than LinkedIn because I get so much email, like we all do. We all suffer from that. And so as a matter of personal discipline, I only check emails, once, maximum twice a day. And sometimes, if it's a busy day, I don't even get to it for a couple of days. So if you want to actually make sure that you connect with me, probably LinkedIn is the best path.
And LinkedIn has at the top, slightly towards the left, a little search bar. And with a name as unique as yours, Sergio Simmel, there's not going to be 100 of them. You type in Andrew Ballard and you'll be scrolling half the day. And so that's a very good point.
Right.
Well,
God forbid that our name would be John Smith. You can imagine that.
That'd be even worse.
Look for John Smith on LinkedIn. Thank you very much. I'll get back to you in about
No
a
help
month.
whatsoever. Even an AI agent isn't going to be able to deal with that. Well, Sergio, I so appreciate your time and talent. I also very much look forward to collaborating with you on helping One Accord clients customize and implement, upgrade their business operating system. So we just so appreciate you. Thanks for sharing how people can get in touch. That wraps us up. Thank you all for joining the Value Factory presented by One Accord. I am your host, Andrew Ballard, thanking Sergio and thanking all of you for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.